Some cartoons from the 90s have lived on to be some of the best ever made, but a lot of those should have never left Saturday morning. And unfortunately, these are a few that, for a variety of reasons, were best left in TV Guide. Whether they were just bad representations of legendary heroes, too difficult to even get past more than a single level, or stuff that maybe should have never been set in front of kids in the first place, none of these games are what kids wanted. Hey guys, welcome back. It's that time again to take a look at a few more cartoons turned into video games. And unfortunately, the one that we're starting with could have easily been one of the best games on the Genesis if it weren't for one little problem. First up on the cartoon block is Batman and Robin for the Genesis, and this is one of those games that's just maddening to me for a variety of reasons, and if you've happened to have played it, then I'm pretty sure you already know why. But if you haven't, well, The Adventures of Batman and Robin came out in 1995 and was developed by a small studio called Clockwork Tortoise. And it's just one of the craziest Batman games out there. Not because it's bad, it's actually kind of neat in certain ways, but because almost nothing about it matches what you'd expect from a Batman game. And that turns out to be both its biggest problem and its most interesting quality as well. So let's just get into this one. Now, when most people talk about The Adventures of Batman and Robin as a video game, they're usually talking about the Super Nintendo version, which came out in 1994 from Konami, a game that we've actually already covered in another review. So if you want to check that one out, then go watch this video. But essentially, that one's a side-scrolling brawler. It looks and feels faithful to the cartoon, and it's generally well regarded. The Genesis version, though, is a completely different game from a completely different studio with completely different gameplay. Same name, same license, different everything else. And this happens way more than you'd think when you're going back between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and it caused endless confusion for us kids back then. As mentioned, the Genesis version was developed by Clockwork Tortoise, who you've probably never even heard of. They're mostly just known for two games, both Batman and both in 1995. This one and the Sega CD version. The development of the game was apparently not a smooth process. Clockwork Tortoise missed multiple milestones, and there's a persistent story that Sega itself had to step in to get this game finished in time for release. And I don't know if any of that's actually true or not, but it would explain a lot about this game. Gameplay-wise, the Genesis version is a run and gun, not a brawler like what you'd expect, but a run and gun in the same vein of like Contra. You walk to the right and you just shoot a bunch of weapons at all the waves of enemies that are constantly coming at you. Batman and Robin are, of course, both playable, but they're both identical, which is either streamlined or just lazy depending on your tolerance for that kind of thing. The weapon system, though, does at least have a little bit of depth to it. You've got 3 projectile types, batarangs, bolas, and bat stars, and each one can be powered up by collecting the same symbol multiple times. There's also a charge shot mechanic where just holding off on firing for a second builds up a stronger blast that can shoot through multiple targets. But I'm gonna tell you right now that you hardly ever have time to do that because you're just constantly holding that fire button down. Besides that, there's not much else to the gameplay. Batman can jump and do various kicks, but you'll probably be using that more just to get away from all the enemies that are constantly swarming you. The visuals, though, are really impressive. This is a late-era Genesis game, and Clockwork Tortoise clearly knew the hardware. Parallax scrolling is everywhere. Scaling effects, bosses that take up significant chunks of the screen with zero slowdown. The sprites even look really good, and the cutscenes are clearly from people who loved the show. And there's even stuff like a top-down shooter stage with what looks like 3D buildings scrolling around underneath you as you fly. This is straight up one of the best looking Genesis games ever made. The problem is that you'll probably never actually see any of those cool stages because the game is just brutal. Genuinely almost unreasonably hard. Stages go on forever, enemies spawn in constantly, and you have limited continues with no save system. And this is one of those games where the enemies will just melt your health bar before you even realize it. The difficulty isn't precision-based in the satisfying way like Contra. This is just more attrition. You die, you restart the stage, and you hopefully memorize the patterns for you to try again, and again, and again. I cannot overstate just how relentlessly difficult this game is. Without cheats, finishing this game is a serious badge of honor. More than one reviewer at the time said it was one of the hardest games that they'd ever played, and take it from me, that is not hyperbole. But if there is one universally praised thing about this whole game, that's the music. We gotta talk about this music. The soundtrack is composed by Jesper Kyd, who at this point had done Subterranea and Red Zone for the Genesis, both known for pushing the hardware's sound chip in unusual directions. What he delivered here, though, would go on to become the most talked about thing in the entire game. The crazy thing is, though, the soundtrack sounds nothing like Batman the Animated Series. The show has a moody, jazzy orchestral score that was closer to something like Danny Elfman in the movies. Kyd, though, just went in a completely different direction stylistically, and the soundtrack ended up being like this dark electronic music that you'd expect to hear at a goth rave. And it's legitimately great music that has almost no business existing in this form on a 16-bit cartridge in 1995. Kyd, of course, would go on to make music for the Hitman series and Assassin's Creed, but you can definitely hear the beginnings of that style right here in Batman and Robin. But besides that soundtrack, how does this thing hold up these days? Well, it would be a total recommendation, but the difficulty just kills this game. It's a technical showcase for sure for the late Genesis hardware, and it needs to be seen to be believed at times. And as a piece of video game music history, the Jesper Kyd soundtrack is essential listening on its own. Just pull it up on YouTube and let it run, and you've basically got the best thing about this whole game. Overall, though, the game got middling reviews when it came out, but it did slowly build a sort of cult following among the people who were patient enough to actually spend some time with it. But for most people, I think the Super Nintendo version is the safer recommendation if you just want something that feels like the show. The Genesis version is the one that you track down when you want something completely different. They're both worth your time, but Batman and Robin on the Genesis is gonna make you work for it. Next up is Spider-Man the Animated Series for the Super Nintendo, and as you may have guessed, you play as Spider-Man in this game. A character whose entire identity is built around acrobatic movement, web-slinging through skyscrapers, and sticking to just about any surface. And in this game, you can barely do any of those things. The wall crawling only works on certain surfaces, the web swing has a mind of its own, and of course, the whole thing was published by LJN, which if you know, then you know. Spider-Man the Animated Series came out in 1995 and was developed by Western Technologies and published by LJN. And it's one of those rare games about being Spider-Man that consistently makes you feel like you're not Spider-Man. It's just really frustrating, and we're gonna get into it right now. The game is of course based on the cartoon Spider-Man the Animated Series that ran on Fox Kids from 1994 to 1998. And that was actually a genuinely good cartoon. It had some good storytelling, a huge roster of villains, and surprisingly mature themes for a Saturday morning cartoon. Just like the X-Men the Animated Series, it had some ambition going for it, even if it did make Peter Parker into this buff jock-looking guy. It also had, famously, some not too great animation choices, especially involving some of the worst CGI the mid-90s could produce. But overall, the show was pretty good, and a lot of kids grew up with it. The game arrived in 1995, right in the middle of the show's run, which should have been a hit on the Super Nintendo for kids wanting some more Spider-Man action. And while the publisher was LJN, it was technically a subsidiary of Acclaim by that point, but that rainbow logo still carried weight in 1995, and not the good kind. But to be fair to this game, it's not the worst thing LJN ever published, not by a long shot, but it's still not a very good Spider-Man game. The Super Nintendo version is a side-scrolling platformer across 6 levels, and Spider-Man can do exactly what you'd want Spider-Man to be able to do. Punches, kicks, wall crawling, web swinging, web projectiles, and even the ability to call in members of the Fantastic Four if you can find them. The game's obviously trying to do a little bit more than your standard Spider-Man game, and it is the bones of something that could have been good. The problem is that most of it just doesn't work the way it should. The wall crawling only functions on specific surfaces with no clear visual indication of which ones that you can actually climb, leading to a lot of moments where you're just jumping at stuff hoping you can stick to it. The web swinging is also very inconsistent due to how perfectly aligned with the ceiling you need to be whenever you need to use it. There's actually a level early on the Brooklyn Bridge that's specifically built around web slinging, and the web just has its own ideas about when it will and will not attach to that damn bridge. There's also this weird thing the game does where it has two planes to each level, most of the time, the foreground and the background, but it's extremely hard to tell when you can or should transition between the two. It's especially annoying when there's stuff you need to attach to and you just have no idea which plane it's on unless you just take a jump at it and hope for the best. The construction yard in particular is an absolute nightmare to get through because of this, and that's just stage 2. The controls basically have two speeds, a walk and a run triggered by holding the same L button that you use for wall crawling. And if you haven't already noticed, this game has a huge pet peeve of mine where you walk way too close to the edge of the screen and you just can't see anything that's coming up at you. And as soon as you start running, you are guaranteed to end up straight into an enemy or a pit before you can even know it's there. And the icing on the cake is that the combat doesn't save any of this. Your basic punch and kicks work well enough, but the hit detection against enemies in this game is just completely weird throughout the whole game. Bosses especially. You'll be right in their face swinging away and genuinely have no idea if you're doing any damage or not. And for a game with this many damn bosses, that's kind of a problem. And I think that's the core problem with this whole game. Spider-Man's moveset only works when the game decides it can work, and that inconsistency basically screws up everything else. Because when your controls are unreliable, you stop experimenting with them. You stop trying to swing around or scale walls to find new creative ways around the level. You just walk forward and punch things and hope that the game doesn't decide to toss you into a damn pit again, which is pretty much the opposite of what a Spider-Man game should feel like. At least the game gives you a bunch of villains, since that roster is actually kind of impressive. Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, the Alien Spider Slayer, and Venom as the final boss. Plus a whole parade of sub-bosses including like the Lizard and Rhino, plus a bunch more. So at least the game does give you a bunch of villains to beat up, but none of them are actually fun to fight, so it's just kind of a wash. All of this combined makes the game feel like the opposite of a Spider-Man game. He doesn't even look like Spider-Man. They didn't even make him like the buff Spider-Man from the cartoon. Instead, he's like this squat little short guy that looks like he wandered into someone's Halloween party. It's just not what you want in this kind of game. And by now, I think you should be able to figure out that Spider-Man the Animated Series is not worth checking out these days. The game, I mean. The cartoon's actually still a lot of fun to watch. But the game, the controls just suck the fun out of playing as Spider-Man. And when your entire premise is be Spider-Man, that's a significant problem. I guess at least you can kind of see what they were trying to do here. It really did try to bring a lot of the show's charm into the game, but then you bump into the wall crawling not working and the web swing just deciding to have the day off, and it just ruins the whole experience. It may have some good intentions and ideas, but almost everything about the game's design is just bad. The loose cards are at least cheap and easy to find, which is probably the correct price. And if you played this as a kid and remember it fondly, then I'm sure some of that nostalgia still holds up these days. But if you're coming in fresh, then probably something like Maximum Carnage or even the later Neversoft PlayStation 1 games are gonna give you a better time. This one's at least worth trying, just to see how hard it is to make Spider-Man feel like Spider-Man, and when it can go really wrong when someone fails at that. The cartoon got it right, and future Spider-Man games would perfect it, but this one, along with most of the rest of LJN's published games, are best left in the past. And finally, let's take a look at a game where you play as a hideously deformed mutant that fights bad guys with a mop, and your name is Toxie. This is Toxic Crusaders, and it came out on the NES and Genesis back in 1992. The NES version was published by Bandai, and the Genesis version was published by Sega. And both of them are based on a cartoon that was based on a trauma movie, a film that was never meant for children in any sort of way. That's 3 levels of licensing decisions that probably should have stopped with the first one, but they weren't, and here we are. To understand the Toxic Crusaders, you need to know a little bit about the Toxic Avenger. That's the 1984 trauma movie, a low-budget, extremely gross, very violent movie about a nerdy janitor who falls into a vat of toxic waste and becomes a monstrous superhero. It's a cult classic, everybody loves Toxic Avenger, but it is emphatically not a kid's movie. So naturally, in 1991, someone looked at that and said, what if we made a kids cartoon about that? And the cartoon, Toxic Crusaders, ran for 13 whole episodes. But the cartoon, of course, softened basically every edge off the movie and added a whole team of other mutant companions to help Toxie fight against pollution.
Which was the style at the time.
And if you got a cartoon, then you obviously need a game, and that followed in 1992. You had an NES version and a Genesis version as mentioned, and they're actually pretty different games despite sharing a name and similar premise. The NES version is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. The Genesis version is also a side-scrolling beat-em-up. The distinction between the two is that the Genesis version is really, really bad. So obviously, we're going to be taking a look at that Genesis version because even though it's teeth-gratingly bad, it's at least kind of funny with how bad it is. Getting into the game, and you've actually got 3 different characters that you can play as, though you might be mistaken for not even really realizing that. You get to pick from Toxie, No Zone, and Junkyard. All of them are from the cartoon, at least as far as I'm aware. But to play as anyone other than Toxie, you have to go into the options screen and change it there. And for whatever reason, if you're playing 2-player co-op, one of you has to be Toxie regardless. It's one of the weirdest ways to handle character select in a brawler, and we haven't even started the game yet. So this is a beat-em-up, technically, but it may just be the worst feeling beat-em-up that I've ever come across. I know I've mentioned that with a couple of games on this channel, but they just keep coming somehow. In this one, the controls are so squirrely that it's almost impossible to feel like you're in control at any point. You skate, sometimes literally, all over the screen. It's like someone put your character on ice and then just attached a rubber band to him as well. If you can manage to stand still, it's at least somewhat doable, but moving around feels so bad that certain stages are just damn near unplayable. And you know what's a great thing to add into your game with controls that bad? One-hit deaths. Lots of them. There are so many instant kill obstacles in this game that half the time you're dead before you even know what happened. And given how the controls are just constantly flinging you around the screen, a lot of those deaths are just gonna happen. And the sad thing is, you kinda just get used to it at some point. But let's just say you can wrangle Toxie for a few minutes. Well, the act of actually hitting dudes with your mop ain't that great either, but it's at least serviceable. You get 2 attack buttons, which is supposed to equate to short and long attacks, but it's honestly hard to tell since Toxie just seems to do like whatever the hell he wants at times. There are some nice touches here and there, like being able to whack your little sidekick with a golf ball if he gets close to you, and cleaning up enemies with your mop after they melt away. That is a nice touch. But there's no time where any of this feels good to play. This is just historically bad controls in a video game. But hold on there, because we're not actually done. Because this game also saw fit to throw in one of the most convoluted item pickup systems that I've ever seen in a beat-em-up. I actually made the mistake of not reading the manual before I started playing this thing, and it took me, like, no joke, half the game to sort of figure out what was happening with these things. Pretty much every enemy or obstacle in the game drops these little green orbs, and depending on the color inside the orb depends on what you get. So hold on to your britches, because we're going to go through every one of these for future posterity. Green and black orbs give you an extra life. Green and red orbs give you a twirling attack. Green and blue orbs gives you skates that make you so damn fast you literally can't control what you're doing, even more so. Green and white orbs are for fist attacks, whatever that means. You've got plenty of fist attacks. I don't get it. And finally, green and gray orbs will give you extra points. But wait a minute, because depending on the stage, those orbs can give you completely different power-ups, and you just kind of have to figure it out at that point. Even the manual's just like, I don't know, figure it out. Like I said, this game is just a mess all around. It's so bad that I was laughing my way through a lot of it because I couldn't believe what was going on. Like, look at this. In the sewer level, you have these like pipes above the level where you're supposed to use Toxie's mop to swing across, which is, yes, another thing he can do. But does this look like it was implemented very well? And this is actually me trying to do this. There's just so much of that in almost every stage. I just couldn't understand how this was released the way it is. At the very least, the game does try to mix in some shooter levels here and there, which are only moderately more playable, and the music, I mean, you can listen to it, but man, overall this game is just something. But you know what? I kind of recommend it, especially if you got a friend around, because this is just a special kind of bad game. It's so unplayable and hard to believe at times that it's kind of hilarious. I don't want to promote alcohol on this channel, but I'm just saying, if you got a friend and a few beers laying around, play this game. You'll see what I mean. It's also one of those games that maybe shouldn't have existed for a variety of reasons. Not only is it just a bad game all around, but it's based off a violent adult horror comedy that somehow became a kids show. Toxic Crusaders is actually a pretty direct window into just how strange the 80s and the early 90s were as far as what could end up being tossed in front of us kids. If you do want to experience this mess for yourself though, then loose Genesis carts are pretty affordable and easy to find these days. If you want the NES version, which is less terrible and actually kind of fun, that's even cheaper and worth a look if you want something that resembles a bit more of an actual video game. But in the end, Toxic Crusaders is only really notable for its origin story and just how spectacularly bad it turned out to be. So grab a friend and maybe a few adult beverages, and come to terms with the fact that the only pollution you'll be cleaning up in this game is tossing the cartridge in the trash. And I think that's going to do it for me this weekend, kiddos. All three of these games could have been so much better if they just had a little bit more time in the oven. Or at least someone to come by and be like, man, this kind of sucks. At least Spidey and Batman had some good games elsewhere, but Toxie never really got a second chance. Hopefully that new one that's supposed to come out this year is as good as it looks. Oh well, at least we can buy the toys again thanks to re-releases. But that's all I got for this video. If you happen to enjoy watching it, then do me a favor and drop kick that like button as hard as possible. And if you really liked it, then feel free to sub for more licensed 16-bit craziness. But at the very least, thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you next week.